The project seeks to engage policymakers and practitioners on our research on disability-related disadvantage in the workplace. Disability at Work is a brand that we developed for doing this, and under that brand there are 3 institutions and 4 academics working. So we're working on an institutional basis and an interdisciplinary basis. And we found that we've got different skills and we work in slightly different areas, but they're all complementary, and this has worked really well. Disability disadvantage is a key area of labour market disadvantage, and it aligns with the decent work theme of the CARB's public value strategy. I'm going to talk a little bit about the policy environment that we've tried to engage with, and then Melanie is going to give you some of the detail about what we've actually done. Disability has been bobbing around quite close to the top of the agenda of Downing Street, the non-Brexit agenda at Downing Street, for about 4 years. David Cameron started it off with some rather loose claims and a commitment to halve the disability employment gap. Somebody then put a time limit on it of 5 years. So he started the process off, but he failed to fulfil the commitment. It's been taken up intermittently by Theresa May, who's been looking for something tangible to demonstrate fairness for all, and including those that have been left behind. But I think it's fair to say that Brexit has displaced the domestic policy agenda. Also, from my experience, what I've found is that policy doesn't really work through an evidence base. It's 95% something else. And there's a little 5% down there that you sometimes get an opportunity to tap into. It's ideology, it's opportunism, and it's sound bites. And I think that the best you can do is sow a few seeds, accept that the land is more or less barren, and see if anything germinates. Sometimes it does, but it doesn't germinate at the time that you've sown it. The favourite measure of disability disadvantage and disability inequality is the disability employment gap. And that's the percentage point difference in the employment rate of non-disabled people and disabled people. And it's currently about 30 percentage points. It has reduced, but it hasn't reduced fast enough, and much of the reduction can be attributed to something other than a reduction in inequality. It's to do with an increase in reporting of disability. Disability is measured as a social thing, and increasing awareness, increasing acceptability, particularly increasing awareness around mental health, has made it more acceptable. So more people are reporting disability, and those people tend to be closer to the labour market. So we've got this reduction in the disability employment gap, which is, it's a good thing, but it's probably not indicating as much as you would think it is the reduction in the difficulties and the disadvantage that disabled people face. So halving the disability employment gap in 5 years was hopelessly optimistic. It was unfeasible. However, what it did do, it did generate an appetite among policymakers to know more about this subject. And there were a series of public inquiries. This one up here was the Work and Pensions Select Committee. It had an inquiry on how to close the disability employment gap. There was then a green paper consultation, which was meant to lead to a white paper on improving lives for disabled people, including increasing their opportunities in the labour market. This never really materialised into a white paper. It ended up just as a command paper with a few very modest interventions. It's still ongoing. And the third thing was disability confident. The government wanted to shift the responsibility for the disability employment gap from government onto employers, and it did this through the disability confident. And this is a kind of, it's an accreditation scheme where an employer gets accredited as being disability confident if it has the right processes in place. The problem with it is it's voluntary, and the second problem with it is it's It's not about outcomes, it's entirely about processes. So you can get your disability confident accreditation and not employ a single disabled person in the workplace, or have any policies. Well, no, you do have to have the policies, but you don't have to be improving your outcomes either. There's our two colleagues in disability at work, Nick Bacon and Kim Hock, have done quite a lot of work on the predecessor to disability confident on 2 ticks. So where do we then, as quantitative researchers, fit into all this? Well, we started with how do we measure disability? It's a pretty boring topic and it's really boring to policymakers, but it's not like measuring sex or race. It's much more difficult. It's not clear-cut. It's not fixed. It's self-reported. It's subjective, and it comes with a whole load of stigma. If the government doesn't measure it well, it can't track its progress in terms of closing the disability employment gap. If employers don't measure it, then they can't manage it in the workplace. So this really has been a 2-person campaign to raise measurement and reporting as a first step to closing the disability employment gap. It's not a complete data desert out there. And we've done quite a lot of research in the area that quantifies the employment disadvantage, and we've tried to identify some of the drivers of the gap. And Mel is going to describe some of the detail of the engagement that we've had with government as public value fellows. Now that sentence is not quite right. We haven't done all of this as public value fellows. Because you'll see we've done an awful lot, but as public value fellows, we only had £2,000 to do it and only 50 hours, WAM hours, and that was between us. Okay, the last week, during the last week, some doors have opened and it's got more exciting than it has been recently, and Melanie's going to tell you all about that.
So you will see it's heavy on work, just like Vicky alluded to. We have spent a considerable amount of time, and I think at the outset we would probably say we didn't necessarily know what we were going to achieve, but hopefully things have started to come together, and we've identified a couple of areas which we think we've had some success. So in terms of where we started, we'd just started at that time to have building a relationship with Disability Rights UK, which is one of the sort of the leading third sector organisations relating to disability equality. We'd co-produced a report, largely drawing on our evidence, which was called Ahead of the Arc. And that essentially went beyond academic evidence to try and formulate practical policy recommendations. We were fortunate in that that report was endorsed by what are known as the all-party parliamentary group. So it had cross-party support, and that really facilitated the kind of audience that report got to. In terms of what did we want to achieve, I think both of us thought we had evidence which, first of all, could be quite critical on some of the claims that we'd seen in terms of government, so we could challenge and scrutinise some of those projections in terms of the government commitments, and we use some of our evidence to actually say that it's not going to be at current rate of progress, it's not going to be 5 years over which you achieve those aims, it's actually going to be much more like 50 years. So I think what we did was we really made the case that something needed to change in order to narrow that disability employment gap. The other thing that Vicky mentioned is that the entire focus really has been on this disability employment gap, so getting people predominantly from welfare into work, what we would call the supply side. And a lot of our work really used match data and looked at the role of the workplace and in-work outcomes, as well as just getting people into work. So if you look at the evidence, there are disability pay gaps, disability job satisfaction gaps, so it doesn't end with getting disabled individuals into work. And really, there's a gap in terms of policy there, which is the focus on employers. Because we do a lot of work that is quantitative, and because the government, we were talking about measurement of government commitments, we also felt that it needed to filter down into measuring disability prevalence, but also disability pay gaps, job satisfaction at the workplace level. And currently, there's a real gap in terms of employers measuring disability. So, what did we do? We provided a lot of evidence, not just through that Ahead of the Arc report, but also much more generally. We built on our relationship with Disability Rights UK and the APPG in order to bring relevant evidence such that particularly the chair of that group could promote political debate. So she asked questions at Prime Minister's Question Time. Have you read this report? What are you doing about it? And that really opened quite a lot of doors for us in terms of filtering down in getting policymakers to meet with us and discuss our recommendations. Similarly, we've got ongoing evidence exchange so that those organisations will contact us and ask about a particular issue, what's the evidence on that, in order for them to challenge government. As I said, that filtered down, so we had opportunities then as co-authors of that report to meet with a whole range of policymakers to try and make sure that some of the recommendations were actually put into practice. So it was both raising the profile of disability in terms of political debate, but also trying to get tangible changes to policy. And not just through meetings. So a lot of them, £2,000 we spent on train journeys to London, but actually I think what we found is by talking to people, you need to follow it up, provide written evidence, accessible evidence, perhaps sometimes target that very much to what they're interested in, which sometimes means you have to think a bit how your research fits more their agenda rather than just your pure research. At the same time, we did a whole range of a broader engagement in terms of policy. So we focused on our relationship with Disability Rights UK, but at the same time we were quite proactive in responding to government requests for information, providing oral evidence at select committee inquiries, and just saying yes to sit as expert panel members, do presentations with a whole range of audiences. And you'll see there that some of them are relatively high level, so trying to influence policy reports, but some of them are also much more practical. So we've had opportunities to sort of work with data providers through ONS and the Government Statistical Service. We've also had opportunities to work with employers. So it's not just about looking at workplace monitoring as perhaps a policy, but also how in practice would employers be able to do that. And I think in general, employers have found measuring disability very difficult. And so what our research, the kind of data we use in our research, brings insights into how you might measure and capture disability at an organisational level. We've gone and talked to equality representatives, HR practitioners within employers at the same time. I think probably the thing that underpins what we've done is by converting our research into something that is digestible and accessible. And probably at the outset, neither of us fully appreciated how far we'd have to go in that way. So our website not only has our research papers on it, but it also spends a lot of time writing policy briefs, practice briefs. Some of those were co-produced with Disability Rights UK, and I think that's really helpful in that they can perhaps gauge your audience better than we could. We also used a range of media, so blogs, but also our film was particularly successful, and we know that HR practitioners have taken that out and used that within their organisations. Achievements, probably less on achievements, but I think at least that the two probably ongoing achievements are firstly the development of that relationship. We now have a relationship whereby this kind of ongoing and mutual exchange of evidence. So yes, we spend a lot of time responding to requests for their evidence, but at the same time we get insights into what is most policy relevant, what people are talking about, how we might tap into those kind of debates that are going on. I think we've also created a recognition within those organisations that quantitative data can be really important in influencing policy. And I guess one of the best ways of illustrating that is that they are now willing to provide letters of support for our research and our future research agenda. And that one of the best illustrations of that is through John Poole, who's joined us today, who's actually on a collaborative ESRC scholarship with Disability Rights UK. So I hope that that relationship is one that's going to be ongoing, and that they will then use that evidence from the PhD. But also, I guess the brand, the website, the kind of investment that we've put in order to try and establish ourselves on the policy and the political arena, hopefully will have ongoing benefits. It does take time. The website needs to be updated. It needs to be accessible. And none of that really brings short-term gains. But now we have people contact us. We have many more invitations to contribute, and I think that's because of the developing reputation. I know Andy's in the audience and he's going to say you need to go beyond engagement to impact, and so I've tried to highlight the two things that I think that we've had most impact. First one is at a very high level. It's in terms of a political impact, so it's in terms of changing perhaps that agenda, or where disability is on that political agenda. And we've been very fortunate in that the chair of that all-party parliamentary group, Dr. Cameron, has been very generous in recognising where she's used our evidence, and so she has acknowledged that and given us recognition. But for us, I think it's also statements like that one, that it's the first time disability has really been, or the economic contribution of people with disabilities has been debated, that perhaps gives you that personal satisfaction. The other area is policy, and I think, as Vicky said, it's often quite difficult to say, well, what has been the impact? But we have, I think, seen citations within some high-profile policy reports which not just directly refer to our evidence, but make recommendations that you can really attribute to the work we've done, particularly around measurement and work quality. And I think it's going beyond those high-level reports. So what we've seen more recently is not just sort of a commitment through improving lives to monitor disability at the workplace, but also frameworks started to be developed which actually take practical steps in order to do that. And so again, it is also about our contribution now in terms of operationalising that and working with employers to take that up, that is going to, I think, have the kind of public value benefits in terms of disabled individuals in the workplace. And I think that's us.